roll here so we can start learning, because there's lots of words and lingos that we talked about last week. Different slangs, different types of new words that are popping up in the Web 3.0. And we're going to try to narrow that verbiage down a little bit, because, when someone mentions a word, it might mean different things to different people here. So we're going to get some intro music, and then we're going to get this Friendly Friday rocking and rolling. So here's some intro music real quick while we're having more and more people join this space. All right, it is a Friendly Friday is back again. I want to welcome all my aliens, apes, and zombies that are tuning in. Cool Blue is back again. Cool Blue, we getting Alan lined up here, because we're going to be talking about what the heck is going on with this Web 3.0.
Yes, so Alan just rebooted. He's coming back up, but we're chatting right now. He's coming back in right now. We can also give a couple of shout outs. I'm seeing some familiar faces in here. Ginger, beloved, welcome. She's actually one of our contest winners and has a shirt signed by Gary V. So shout out Ginger. I saw Tan in here earlier from VNFT. Trey, hello. And then Drip Ballers. It's so awesome seeing these familiar faces that show up every Friday. We get to hang out with you, and we have another amazing Twitter Spaces coming up. Again, Alan is logging back on right now. We'll bring him to the stage, but this is a topic. Go ahead, Nova.
I wanted to say what's up to Cool Blue. I saw you out and about, a couple weeks back, and I just love how you claim yourself as a guppy in the sea, but if you're in the whales, you're knowing what's going on. So Cool Blue in the house. Make sure you're checking that out. And then also at VNFT, pretty sure everyone's following here, but we're trying to line up this educational content so we can understand what is happening in this Web 3.0 space, because around the water cooler, like the water cooler talk, when people are like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Like, I'm hanging out in the metaverse. Well, what does that actually mean? It might mean something different to me. It might mean something different to you. It might mean something to someone who has no clue what the metaverse is. So like for me, and my kind of origin story a little bit is, the metaverse to me is where I established myself. And that was hopping around in Decentraland, where I'm able to connect my MetaMask wallets to get into a platform where I'm able to run around and socialize. But, the context of metaverse has evolved so much because there's so much out there. So we're going to bring that in a little bit here. Cool Blue.
Yes, thank you. We have Alan to the stage now. So the man of the hour, the alien, ape, and zombie of the hour. I also want to give a shout out to Hizzy. Hey, see you in the crowd. Thanks for coming. And Elena. But yeah, Alan, how are you? GM.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me up here. Excited to talk about Web3 and whatever else we get into.
So with that is a little bit of like terms and definitions. It's kind of tough because it's always evolving in this space. So, what has been the evolution from like the Web 1.0 to 2.0 and now into this Web 3.0 in your vision, in your eyes?
I think it's an evolution in a lot of different ways, right? So it's an evolution in like the tech, like the tech stack, how we interact with it, those sort of things. And if you just look at, for instance, when we first got on the web, it was just pretty much, you published, and I'm talking like late 90s, early 2000s, all about someone create some sort of static page. Maybe there was some interaction and then you could go there and read it, right? That was pretty much it. And then you had early sort of like what we would call today Web 2 tech, where people were able to basically write and save information in a very dynamic way, right? A lot of people. You didn't need like to create a whole website to be able to like give information out via the web. So you liked that, like, obviously there was MySpace, there were things before MySpace, sites like Friendster, and then obviously now we have like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, where you basically can have all this information out there, and then a community has really expanded in a bi-directional way, whereas before it was more just one direction, right? And now with Web3, it's really the ownership of what you create, right? And that's sort of the next step, is that in Web2, we don't own anything. We don't own this space. We don't own tweets. We don't own our Instagram posts. We don't really own much. And where we're taking Web3 is more around ownership. So it's ownership of your content, ownership of your assets, ownership of your money. And with that comes great responsibility as well. I think one of the things that we've gotten used to with Web 1 and Web 2 is someone taking care of everything for us. And we've sort of pacified in a way to really just rely on other entities and trusting them. And I think we've been seeing a lot of that trust betrayed in a lot of different ways. So now, naturally, I think, is just the evolution is to create network systems and communities that higher sort of control back. I don't think ultimately it's going to take utopian, everything is decentralized sort of world that people believe. I think we'll have something close, like further away from like centralized entities, and people having the option to trust centralized entities, whereas today we're just essentially forced to trust them with our assets, with our value and everything.
I want to touch base on that because I know all of us are probably guilty of it a little bit. In the Web 2.0, you forget your password, you just click a button, they resend you another link to claim that password. Where Web 3.0, it's not that. If you lose your keys, you're pretty much done. Also, what I've been personally seeing, and is this more of Web 2.0, like you're saying, they're collecting information on you. Anytime I click on something, it feels like I need to unsubscribe to 10 things on the one thing I click. Where the Web 3.0 is almost the reset button where, you know, buyer beware what you click. But once you click and apply that application to you know what you're getting into, hopefully, if you're doing your research. And then with that, there's not a lot of junk with it. I mean, we're seeing it obviously sent to wallets through side chains and maybe wearables or NFTs, but, you know, essentially connecting to a Web 3.0 experience has been the change. You know, with that, you know, like, go ahead.
Well, I would say we're still getting a good bit of that clutter and spam, like you said, with like NFTs. If you remember what, like a month ago, panic around I think everyone thought that OpenSea, well, some people thought OpenSea got hacked, and everyone was like, oh, I got to revoke all my permissions, because if you've been in this space, I guarantee you, maybe only like 1% of people were really good about revoking permissions, not just to OpenSea or to like a bunch of different contracts. So you have sites like revoke.cash, and everyone's going there, then that crashed. So there's still a good amount of like behavior for us to learn when it comes to responsibility. But I think it all comes down to option. Before, you couldn't just have your assets completely control them, and you had a network or a system to really protect and secure those assets for you, that you didn't have to trust in a way that, you know, like compared to like a bank where they can just confiscate your assets, or other similar financial entities, or even honestly to some extent government entities as well, right? So I think that's the one big delineation there.
Alan, am I hearing right? So the most important part of Web 2 is that digital ownership, and with that comes full accountability whenever we get this decentralized territory.
Yeah, so I think you meant to say Web3, Leslie?
I meant Web3, excuse me. Yeah. Thank you for that correction.
Right. So there's a direct relationship between a network or a system being decentralized and ownership, right? So here's an example. I mean, so because, for instance, we can just take Ethereum or even Bitcoin, because there's no entities, or I would even say collection of entities that have shown, there's been no evidence the collection of entities have done this, but there's certainly no single entity that currently controls, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin, right? And because of that, because of the lack of control, both those networks are sufficiently decentralized where if I own an asset for that to actually be revoked in any way would take an immense amount of funds and computing power to, say, roll back the change or potentially even very strongly censor a transaction. So decentralization is why ownership is real on these networks. There are other networks where a company, though, controls truth on that network. And that is a big difference that I think we need to have more awareness of networks where truth is actually controlled by a single entity. They use all the right words, they dress it up, right? They say all the right things, but at the end of the day, they can still confiscate your assets because they control truth, they control the network, they control the nodes, they control enough tokens where consensus can actually be formed outside of their participation or approval. So we have to be aware of those sort of networks which dress up like what I would call more Web3 networks in contrast.
Now, are we talking about centralization and decentralization as a whole right now? Would you say Web3 is decentralization, moving from centralization, or how would you differentiate the two?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably more of a purist take, but say that Web3 and decentralization go together. I think where you get sort of, in the way I look at it, when people think metaverse, they think Web3 only. And I just don't think that's the way things will play out. I think we're going to get this metaverse concept, which is very nebulous. We can acknowledge that. This this metaverse concept is more a combination of Web2 technologies, the Web3 technologies and Web2 technologies. Even today, like people, we bitch about OpenSea all the time, but people say that's Web3. Yeah, they're on they have smart contracts, but ultimately they own the admin keys to some of the smart contracts that, like the OpenSea shared storefront. Their front end is completely centralized. They're not hiding this fact, right? It's out in the open, but a network is truly, a decentralized application is truly decentralized when even the front end can be used in a way and spun up by anyone. I think a good example of this to some extent is Uniswap, right? So Uniswap has like everything, well, up until through V2, it was open source. They had IPFS links. Anyone could spin up an IPFS site themselves with Uniswap, and obviously the smart contracts are on chain and they can interact with them. So I felt like Uniswap V2 was probably the closest that we got, like full stack decentralization. I'm sure there's other applications, but just something that everyone else can recognize. So I think metaverse is like Web 2 and 3 together, but Web3's focus is around decentralization and promotion of true ownership of different digital assets. That's the way I would categorize those.
Yeah, Web3 cannot just be, the metaverse just can't be strictly Web3. It needs to incorporate some Web2 values. Hence, if you want to call it Web 2.5. But what else is the metaverse not?
Well, to me, the metaverse is not just like virtual land, right? Everyone is just like, let's buy some Decentraland or Voxels, or Somnium or what have you, Sandbox. Nothing against those projects. And if you really want to get into it, let's look at how they're being operated and the infrastructure to run them. I would say there's definitely points of centralization as well in those aspects. So I think it's definitely not just virtual land. I think what metaverse really is more your digital identity coupled with a digital experience, and that's not everything being digital though, right? So what I mean by that is it is a digital experience and a digital identity, but it could also have physical elements where it's basically supported by digital technologies, right? So if we have items in the physical world or even like AR space that are tied to like NFTs, it's still digitally backed essentially, right? And NFT is underlying maybe shoes that are tracked as an NFT in that way. And that to me is part of the digital experience.
This is important, Cool Blue. This is important because this is kind of my thought process on when I started with having my avatar, having an AR filter, dressing up like the the NFT I've become, and it is that whole metaverse experience for me, being in real life as my NFT, being out there in the digital space as my NFT, because that's what I want to do, and I have the ownership of it, different capacities, very similar to what you're doing, Cool Blue, with your World of Women, and how you're rocking that in the digital ways, in the physical ways, and bringing it out there.
Okay, so we're seeing, just so I'm understanding, we're seeing, although this is a very digital space and bringing our digital identities into this digital experience, the physical elements that you touched on that are so interesting to me to see these IRL and digital mesh, those physical elements are like how we bring this digital world to life in our everyday life. Does that sound, yeah?
Yes. I think that's one way to look at it. Quick question: is that your name, Cool Blue, for your World of Women there?
Yes.
Awesome.
Exactly.
I got it up right. I got it up right now. It's you can check it out. Blue GMI, and it's cool, and it shows what Cool Blue does. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is, if we want to take Cool Blue's example, that's a digital experience that she's, starting out, whether it's, it could be a Twitter account, but that could evolve into a different sort of persona, right? And then you could, that's tied to an NFT, which is, a Web3 object as well. So like what Web3 looks like and metaverse, these things are going to continue to iterate and evolve. And it's going to be all supported by different technologies. And I think that's when we're really going to see these things scale and skyrocket. If you think about like Web 1, the whole fight was like all about desktops, right? You remember like it was like Windows and then when Apple and there's not less so Linux, but like Linux came on later. But it was all a fight for a market share of your desktop. Web 2 was a fight for essentially market share of mobile devices, right? And if you look at it, we've sort of transitioned into a world where it was just essentially like radio, then TV, right? Then radio, TV and radio, then more TV, and then we had TV and desktops, and now we've transitioned to basically like TV and mobile devices, right? And I think the next iteration after mobile devices is control of your wallet. The wallets are going to be the one that really deliver, in my opinion, the digital experience and preserve your digital identity, right? So if you look at the fight between like Apple and Android, just from like an OS perspective, and all these different devices that we have, and they're really heavily integrated with Web2 platforms and technologies, even the payment platforms like Venmo and PayPal, and that's great. We for the most part, honestly, everyone loves it. If you have these devices, we can interact. Web3 to me is now the rise of the wallet and the experience that gives you and how it preserves your identity. And more importantly, you can now get a rich amount of data from a wallet. And you may or may not even need to know that person's identity. Because the difference between a wallet and, for instance, you liking different things on media is a wallet is more tied to actual hard money transactions, right? And what that means is, people go and like people's pictures. That's indicative of something. But I think there's a much stronger signal when you can say, this person's buying these things, or this person's actually keeping these things. They got it, even if it was an airdrop, they kept it for some amount of time, right? So I think the amount of data that's going to get sort of pulled out of Web3, pulled out of our wallet, whether or not that person's doxxed, I think is where that real sort of like, when these sort of like consumer services come on top, we're going to really see some crazy stuff.
And I think
you just touched on something so fascinating to me. I'm able to now because for anyone, just context for the audience right now, I am jumping into the metaverse as a newbie right now. I feel like I understood NFTs a little bit. Now working my way into more metaverse, Web3. So that was very fascinating. Having that visual of desktops transitioning into mobile devices, transitioning into wallets, because that also shows how much more data will come from this. When we first got a mobile device, we can call people back and forth. We weren't really anticipating smartphones. So it also that's the type of epiphany that will absolutely get me thinking. But while I do want to move on to NFTs and see how NFTs play a role in this space, I want to make sure that I'm understanding the two differences between Web3 and Metaverse, because I typically use these terms interchangeably. So before we move on to more of how NFTs and other aspects of Web3 support, what is the difference between Web3 and Metaverse?
Yeah, so I think I look at it like the Metaverse basically encompasses like Web3, right? Like Web3 and Web2 together currently deliver we think of the Metaverse. And it's more like a technical sort of separation. So there's like in most anything we do today digitally, there's a separation between like data and basically there's a separation between data and experience, right? They use the data to deliver some sort of experience. Metaverse is the experience, and how you get that data is based on the technology that supports it. That technology could be Web2 technology or it could be Web3 technology. That's how I look at it. So if I were to draw a picture, it would have Metaverse at the top, and then it would be connected to like Web2 and Web3, and then Web3 is decentralized, and that's how it is. And I expect as we iterate and continue to evolve, that Web3 continues to take more and more of sort of those integrations, those dApps, and using data and delivering experiences to Metaverse users. So, just to boil it down to one line, Metaverse is experience, Web3 is the technology that's enabling the Metaverse experiences. That's my opinion. Other people would argue otherwise, maybe. I'm not sure.
It does make perfect sense, and it does kind of draw a distinction between the two, as like the experience and then how you're getting involved in that experience through Web 3.0 like add-ons, which are the wallet accessibility. And then also some of that accessibility is what we're seeing with NFTs. And how are the NFTs kind of evolving, not only the metaverse space, but then the Web3 space as well, since it's all encompassing.
I see. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that's just, listen, these things could evolve. The brands are coming, the existing, stalwarts of this space, big tech, we'll see how Google and Apple handle it. Some of these, I mean, they're going to have to really think their business model. Some of these entities, like you look at what Apple is doing with the Apple Store, and that I think I was in the spaces yesterday, and we're talking, I think, the Apple Store is like 20 to 30%, like their fees or Apple's revenue or something like that. So they're going to keep, Apple's always been, very controlling of everything related to their experience. So it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt, if at all, to this like Web3 space and this Web3 technology, or if they can essentially gloss over that and just slap the label on it and call it metaverse, and people won't care whether or not they actually own their assets, right? We're just culturally, if you think about it, culturally, we're just not used to actually owning things. We're actually used to depending on custodians for our money. We're used to just depending on intermediaries to perform a service. We've never had the option to be completely responsible for it. And so that's a behavioral and cultural thing that I think will take some time to evolve as far as like people getting out of that mindset. And it's probably going to be generational. Like it's going to take multiple generations before we really want, like as a society, end up in a place where we want decentralization or more decentralization. We want to actually fully like have ownership of our assets. The other thing is we never really had to do this sort of thing until this technology came around. We couldn't preserve items digitally without the double spend problem. So Bitcoin was like the first iteration of solving that. Enabling people. So the way we got here is just a lack of technology and a lack of the innovation necessary to sort of culturally grow up in a way where we actually have the ability to own something. The babies that are born this year are going to have a completely different mindset because they're going to be handed assets that they actually own by the time they're like teenagers that they now have to preserve and maintain. We never had to do that, right? So I think these are very long time frame sort of considerations, but culture is the hardest thing to change at every layer, where it's like culture of society or even culture. Like when you get a new CEO at a company, a lot of things they focus on is establishing a new culture. That just takes a long time because culture really influences behavior.
It's so interesting. It's very interesting to think about the space and where it's going. Crypto Nova, I saw you on mute. Did you have a comment or question?
It was more of a comment. I often ask people, when they're getting married, would you offer your significant other a diamond ring or an NFT worth the same amount of value? And they kind of scratch their heads, and it depends who you are. Some people would rather have that Bored Ape or CryptoPunk rather than the jewelry. And it just depends how you grew up, the generations you grew up, and what gets handed down to you and the value you put amongst things. And what it is the value that is in the stake of the community that puts value towards the NFT, towards a project, towards what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do NFTs lead to the metaverse? Are they kind of tickets into the metaverse? What is the role of the NFT to this metaverse experience?
So to me, NFTs are just part of like this sort of Web3 sort of component toolkit, right? There's NFTs, there's these cryptocurrency networks themselves, there's layer 2s, there's the bridges, and it's how they all offer different degrees of trustlessness and how much you have to trust or not trust them. So I think NFTs are a big component of that. And just to look at this is how I look at NFT. If we take crypto and put it to the side, if you just look at like traditional finance markets, the vast majority of all the value in the world is actually outside of like money markets. So if you think of money markets today, like of cryptocurrencies, like, so if you have like a fiat currency, like like a dollar or euro or won or whatever, right? Those are money market. You have all these different money markets, and now those have a certain. But if you look at everything else that has value, it's more unique items, right? Like different types of properties, companies, things like that. So you have all these sort of non-fungible objects, and now we're essentially replicating those in a digital sense into like non-fungible tokens. So I see like right now, I think people are just programmed. They think non-fungible tokens. They think a picture of some sort of like cartoon or pixelated something, right? So along those lines, like NFT is going to evolve into basically being anything unique that needs to be secured, that is secured by a blockchain, right? A cryptocurrency network, a public network that anyone can access. Eventually, in like 5 years, NFTs are not going to be tied so much to art and tied more so to uniqueness.
Okay, that makes sense to me because we can prove the ownership. Now I see how the ownership ties into all of this. That makes total sense. I want to be conscious of time, but I want to get to two important questions before we do close out. One is about the experience we're talking about of the metaverse, and the other is about places to get started. So can we dive into really quickly some examples? And Crypto Novo, I definitely want to hear your input on this as well, but some examples of these experiences that the Web3 technology and data activate.
Well, right now, I mean, some of the experiences that I'm seeing, and I just like to run around in different types of, platforms, is that engagement of just going there to simply interact with other people in social events. If it's collecting a POAP at a Decentraland location, if it's going in to see an artist perform live, because a lot of these things are new, and I'm trying to find out what's new in the space, and a lot of it's just a click away. And you go there, and it's something that you need to familiarize yourself with, but hopping in the Discord communities is a great way of doing that, because you can interact with other people that are maybe at the same knowledge level as you. If it's, intermediate, beginning, or advanced, and you can, hey, what are the appropriate links to actually click to get started. And you can find that just on the announcement page in a lot of Discords. And that's, the first button is that first button to success a lot of times. So you need to familiarize yourself with different aspects. So then you know what's out there fully.
So can you repeat the question again, Leslie?
Yes, I'm trying to get a visual on the types of experiences that the metaverse allows for. So how I imagine it is these digital worlds, these digital environments that you can have conferences and events and parties and galleries in. Is that what we see when we think of metaverse? Is that fair to say?
I think that's part of it. I'll give you an even more basic version. I think the fact that our address is also our identity, right? And if you take something like, say, the ENS protocol, and you have, like, for instance, I have an ENS, I have 0x Allen, right? Like my name on here. This is essentially like my Ethereum address and log in a lot of different sites with essentially the click of a button, right? We don't need emails any longer. And that is also tied to my identity. So I think this is like the most basic example. You see, I think the Ethereum community or a group of people within the Ethereum community basically taking something that in the corporate world or in a lot of, you may not notice it, something called single sign-on, and they're completely about to blow it out of the water with the Ethereum's single sign-on as well. And it's just, we've been doing it already. Think about when you connect to OpenSea or you go to mint something, you just log in with your MetaMask wallet, right? You just connect and it just links. There's no, let me go check for all this. And it's also tied to assets. So it's sort of like single point where you have potentially your identity, you have your experience, and you have your assets. We now, as the metaverse grows, guess what? No one needs to, how do we log in? How do we manage? No, the user authentication, user authorization, that layer is essentially already taken care of with signing in with your Ethereum address, right? So it doesn't matter what metaverse does. Remember, metaverse is essentially the presentation experience. So the Web3 tech says, just click a button to log in. We can even do that with Web2, really. We always have to have some sort of like additional like email and all this other stuff.
Verification.
Yes.
Whereas, think about it, Cool Blue, when you won that contest for World of Women and you were able to travel out to LA for the Billboard Women Music Awards, that's what it is. You're able to access that because you had a World of Women in your wallet. You did the promotion that linked you in, or you showed off Cool Blue, and then that accessed you there. And then now the metaverse now evolves into an IRL experience where you are dressed up as your NFT in a social setting, which maybe 2 years ago we didn't have that chance to do because we were stuck in a more of computer-based type of communication and social interaction, where nowadays we are able to get out there into physical events. You've seen it out in NFT NYC, you see it out ETH Denver, and you're going to see these things grow and more because that's how we interact with each other. And now that Web3 interaction turns into what is evolving into the metaverse, which is a lot of capacities, not just being locked in on digital real estate, not just locked in on just your MetaMask wallet, but also how that all incorporates into in real life events, which we're all getting more and more encompassed back into.
Great point. So I'm seeing that the experience that that the metaverse allows us, or Web3 allows us to experience with the metaverse, aren't just these virtual worlds. It's also the actual experience with the tech and verification that we will have access to. So it's just so fascinating.
Because these wallets are now giving you entry into different events due to the NFTs you might own. You see it time and time and again with different NFTs where, you have that. You either get maybe some physical clothing with it that matches your NFT. Maybe you get invited to in real life events or access into different types of in real life types of events that you're seeing more and more.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's wrap things up. This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like we've gone through the evolution of Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, landing at Web, really having this digital ownership and being the technology and data that activates the experiences of the metaverse, which is in itself what we are experiencing because of Web 3. And through that, we have NFTs that are a supplementary piece of that experience. So what we may have seen as NFTs being the big picture is really just a stepping stone to what this big picture of Web3 really is. So having all this information and this newfound knowledge for many of us, what would be the next step? What would you recommend someone who is into NFTs, comfortable buying, comfortable flipping, comfortable experimenting with and exploring? What would be the next step that you would suggest for them if they want to explore the metaverse more?
Well, I mean, it seems like they've already done a lot of the. I'll tell you what I think. I think the best thing for everyone is to find your place I'm not telling people to get a job, because you don't have to get a job in this space. You can be an entrepreneur. I don't think there's opportunity. Yeah, I don't think there's a bigger opportunity in any space, whether from an employment perspective or as an entrepreneur, than in the Web3/metaverse space right now. I think the opportunities are immense, and you may think you don't have the skills or you don't have the experience. A lot of times, and this comes from just the regular world, you can just start doing something and get opportunity just by joining a community, contributing, and then people will find you out, right? So I think if you really already know how to do a lot of these things and you're looking for some sort of change, or just looking for a new challenge, I think just looking for companies or starting an idea, partnering with other people, working on a project. I mean, this is truly an opportunity. And it's not, and when I say opportunity, it's just an opportunity. I'm talking about an opportunity to write your own script for what you want to do in the space. And I think that we started, a year ago, we were on here talking to a lot, well, not on here, on Clubhouse, a lot of artists or people wanting to come into the NFT space. And I think that's just like one channel, right? There's so many different roles that are going to be in this space. Like a community manager 3 to 4 years ago. Like there was no, like today, if you're a good community manager, you can command like a real good salary. As crazy as that sounds, that actual skill to doing that role, or managing other community managers, right? Or writing integrations to different aspects of Ethereum or the network. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. There's too much money being poured into it. So if you don't want to speculate, if you don't want to invest, you can certainly become a builder. There's always an opportunity to be a builder. So that's what I would say to that.
And even if you don't have the tech savvy to do it, I'm a builder. I build friends and relationships all the time. And a lot of those are built in what I deem is, in my head, is the metaverse, and getting out there and getting into these IRL events, getting into different digital real estate platforms to talk and socially interact and see what's out there. So to answer Leslie's question, how do you get in there? Get out there and have fun. See what it has there. You have these NFTs, go have fun with them, go play with them, see what they can do, see what access you can get, see how, see the range of that NFT. And that's what you're going to see in the successful projects, is the ones that have that range, that can meet a lot of the parameters that you're looking for in maybe yourself personally, but just all that's out there. Leslie, we got to wrap it down, because I see a couple of people actually out there, like Dylan and Tan, that were probably tapping their foot, that were supposed to be in a meeting. But it is a friendly Friday, and I love it. And I love these spaces, and I love talking about it. So Alan, I know you had a lot going on this week. Thank you for your time, most importantly, because time is of the essence here.
Alan, Crypto Novo, Thank you both so much for taking me on this journey through the metaverse today. This has been my favorite conversation all week. Shout out to all the VNFT people in the crowd. We have Dylan H, we have Dylan R, Tan, I saw him in there. Ryan, thank you everyone who we see here weekly. Thank you everyone so much for being in the audience. If you have any follow-up questions, tweet them at us. And with that, I wish everyone a very happy, friendly Friday. Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Just want to say stay positive and love life. Peace. Section from the lead singer of 311, Stay Positive and Love Life. It is March 11th. See Mr. D down there in the crowd. Thank you very much for listening. Again, thanks for setting this up, Leslie. Alan. Friendly Friday. Stay positive and love life. Peace.